Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the playoffs and the playoff format and all that. Now, I'm not getting into some of the discussion we have every year. Every year we discuss, hey, 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7. Who could say no? The reality is we already have 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7. We don't have 3 versus 6 or 4 versus 5. But currently the top seed in the conference plays the number 2 wild card. The second seed is the other division winner, and they play the number 1 wild card. So that's already 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7. Now, some of the arguments I hear, and I watched today as Craig Button was talking on TSN about how it'd be better to give a better reward for the team with home ice advantage in the first round. Give them 5 home games instead of 4. The problem is that if a team is going to lose in the playoffs, I don't think it matters where they play. And I've got stats on the board here for this because I want to make sure I'm backing it up with some statistics. But really, when you look at it, right now we've already got a system where usually the home ice team will win. Last year, 6 of 8 first round higher seeds won. The previous year, 6 of 8 higher seeds won again. So if you want to, in the playoffs, say, I'll take all the home teams, you're probably going to be right. Now, 2021, 3 out of 8 of the home teams won in the first round. I didn't put an asterisk there, but I could have, because that's the divisional rounds, right? That's when you had the Canadian teams just playing the Canadian teams. These teams knew each other really well, so it wasn't a huge surprise that having home ice advantage didn't mean that much when these are teams who had seen you, 8 times that season? Yeah, they start to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. 2020, even in the bubble, 6 of 8 that were the higher seeds ended up moving through to the next round. And then 2019, it was 3 of 8. So while we had upsets in 2020 in the qualifying round, we didn't see as many once we got into the first round of the playoffs. 2019, of course, was chaos. The top seeds were out, especially Tampa Bay being out. It just threw everybody's brackets into complete and total chaos. And I do feel like it's been 5 years since that. We could see it again. And if we see it again, the argument's going to come up again about how, hey, these top seeds, they need more of an advantage. But they don't. So I want to talk about the President's Trophy curse, because this is part of it. Who's the ultimate top seed? Well, it'll be the number 1 team in the league. So where have they fallen apart? Well, Boston's on the board 3 times, so this is going to be fun. And they have a chance of winning it again. So last year, of course, they were up 3-1. They won both games in Florida to come home with that lead. The problem was they couldn't win at home. So they ended up going 1-3 at home. They lost Game 5 and Game 7 at home. And this is where, again, watching TSN this morning, I was like, but Boston lost their games at home. So if you add an extra home game, they might have lost quicker because Florida didn't play nearly as well at home as they did on the road in either of the first 2 rounds. Florida was glad to have those road games. So add road games, Florida might have been through those quicker, which brings us to Florida being the President's Trophy winner in 2022. They lost in the second round against Tampa Bay. It was 4 straight. They lost those first 2 at home, and they were done. So again, you had an extra home game. They still, I think, would have been swept. And I don't think that extra home game shows up in the first 4, because it has to be 2-2. Like, if you were going to make it so that you could go 2-3-2. You could. The NHL did 2-3-2 in the mid-90s. It didn't work out that well for higher seeds. Now 2-3-2 being 2 home, 3 on the road, and then the last 2 at home. I guess you could do 2-2-3, but again, you have to have those 2. You have to split the first 4 games. You just have to. So then 2021, we look at the Colorado Avalanche, who would win the Cup in 2022, which is an argument I've had before that, yeah, your President's Trophy winner doesn't necessarily win in the playoffs, but it does tell you there's a good chance they're going to win in the future soon. So for Florida and maybe for Boston, this could be a good sign. But again, Boston may win it again this year. Colorado could win it this year. Florida could win it this year. It's going to be interesting. But Colorado lost in the second round against Vegas in 6 games. They did go 2-1 at home. So if you add an extra home game, do they win that series? I don't think so. But again, maybe you can make the argument there. Boston, bubble playoffs. So home ice, there really wasn't any. They lost 4-1 in the second round against Tampa Bay, did those Boston Bruins, and they were out. So Tampa Bay, not a team that Boston has a great track record against. And then back in 2019, of course, we had the Tampa Bay Lightning lose in 4 in the first round, famously in 4 in the first round. They went 0-2 at home. And, of course, for the preview for that, I just started with Columbus is dead. And then I went into an actual preview where I talked about if Columbus is going to have a chance, this is what they have to do. And then they won in 4 straight. So that's a sensational result for a President's Trophy winner, especially since Tampa Bay was so good all year. Much like Boston last season, good all year. Playoffs, it's a different beast. The team that's really good during the regular season is not necessarily great in the postseason. It's different. So during the regular season, you are on the road, you go through various cities, you come home, there's various teams coming in. In the playoffs, you only have to worry about one team. You don't care what's going on anywhere else. You're not scoreboard watching if you're smart about it. All you do is focus on the team you're against and what's going on there. And when we get into that kind of matchup, that's how you have a Columbus Blue Jackets knock off Tampa Bay. Columbus isn't worried about anybody but Tampa. And Tampa, I think, overlooked Columbus that year. I think they just assumed they were going to win that series. And it didn't look like Tampa Bay took it all that seriously until they were down in Game 4 and realized we might lose. That's how it looked on TV. I'm not saying that's how they actually felt. It just looked like they were going through the motions until then, which I still think was part and parcel because Tampa Bay didn't have important games down the stretch. And this is why we see upsets as well. Sometimes the top seed, well, they've had home ice and first place sewn up for a long time. So they can take their foot off the gas. The team they're playing against has been playing playoff hockey for weeks. Maybe as much as like 6 weeks they've been fighting and battling to try to get in the playoffs. So they're already in the war. They're already battle-hardened. And now they're against a team that hasn't really had to work as hard recently and hasn't had to be in that playoff mode. That's how we see those upsets. Nashville, 2018, they get to the second round. They lost in 7 games against Winnipeg. Winnipeg was the number 2 team in the league that year. And Nashville went 1-3 at home. So, again, they were better on the road than they were at home. Washington, back-to-back years for Washington. They were President's Trophy winners. So maybe instead of being the President's Trophy curse, we could just call it the Bruins and Capitals curse. Go back and look at it. They've definitely had their issues when they win it. So in 2017, Washington loses in the second round against Pittsburgh in 7. They went 1-3 at home. Notice that in 7 means they get that home ice advantage for that Game 7. They fight all year for it, and then they lose. Game 6 was their issue in 2016, where, again, they lose against Pittsburgh, again in the second round. This is why in 2018, when Washington beat Pittsburgh in the second round, I was floored. I couldn't believe they did it. I was very happy for the Caps because for many, many years I'd watched as this team just couldn't get over that hump. But in 2017, they go 1-3 at home. 2016, they were 2-1 at home. Again, they just couldn't win in Pittsburgh. So this could be an argument for, hey, if they had an extra home game, maybe, but still, you'd have to win at least a game in Pittsburgh. The New York Rangers, they lost versus Tampa Bay in the conference final back in 2015. That was a 7-game series. The 2015 playoffs were a thing of beauty. It is a shame this channel wasn't around for the 2015 playoffs. It is, because those were great playoffs. Now, Rangers went 1-3 at home in that series against Tampa. So home ice advantage didn't help them in that one. And then there's Boston 2014, where the curse kind of starts on the board because 2013, of course, Chicago, in a lockout shortened season, they went all the way through the regular season, made it look easy, and then they did the same in the playoffs. So 2014, Boston loses in the second round against Montreal, 4-3, because Montreal's a bad matchup for Boston. Boston went 2-2 at home in that series. So they just couldn't get the win when they needed it in Montreal, and then Game 7 at home, they lost. They won 2 of the first 3 at home. They couldn't win the Game 7. Montreal showing that as underdogs, they're very dangerous. And so, yeah, Boston has lost the... when they've won the President's Trophy in the last 10 years, second round, first round. So if they win the President's Trophy this year, will I be surprised if they're out in the first or second round? No, which, according to Bruins fans, makes me a bad Bruins fan. I just know how it works. So looking back to 2012, I had to mention that in this video. Had to, didn't I? The LA Kings, a number 8 seed going in, they went 16-4 to win the Stanley Cup in 20 games. They made it look easy. What was interesting with that, of course, is they first knock out Vancouver, the President's Trophy winners in 2012. They won the first 3 games in that series, and then they won it in the 5th game. But what's interesting is they won the first 3 games in every series. So fans that were laughing at the Canucks coming out of that first round in 2012, some of that laughter dampened down as the playoffs went along. And by the time they were up 3-0 in the final, Not much left to laugh about. These Kings were for real, and they were a number 8 seed that may not have made the playoffs if they'd been in the East. So this shows that, and it doesn't happen very often. That's why I had to go all the way back to 2012. But it shows you make the playoffs, you get on a run, you get hot at the right time, you can win it. Now, the playoffs, as they're currently set up, and I know by points percentage it might be different. I don't care. I'm going by points. You'd have Boston, the number 1 seed in the East, so they'd be against the number 2 wildcard Detroit. Boston should win that, right? If that was the series right now, Boston should win that. You'd have Florida, the number 2 seed, against the number 3 seed Toronto. Absolute shame for Toronto if that were the case. I don't see them beating Florida. But then in the second round, I don't see Boston beating Florida either. Florida's already shown they can beat Boston as recently as last year. Maybe Boston gets their revenge, but we'll see. Then you've got the New York Rangers, the number 1 team in the Metro, number 2 seed right now in the East. They'd play Tampa Bay, the number 1 wild card in the first round. Tampa Bay is an underdog. I think there'd be people taking them to win that round. Now, I do think the Rangers should win that, but look at all the star power in Tampa Bay. You just can't assume. Carolina, the number 2 seed, would be against Philadelphia, the number 3 seed. Yeah, I think Carolina would win that series, but that would be a chess match. And if Philly could win one of the first 2 games in Carolina and put that little bit of doubt in the Canes' minds, who knows? Then we go out west. Vancouver's currently the number 1 seed in the West via points. They would play the number 2 wild card in the West, which is Vegas. So would people, with the way these teams are playing right now, take Vegas or Vancouver? Because both teams have had their struggles recently. But I do think that if it was a channel vote, and we'll do the channel votes before the playoff series start, I think Vegas would probably get more votes than Vancouver right now. I do. I think Vegas would. Then the numbers 2 and 3 seeds, Edmonton and LA, as nature intends. These teams meeting again would be absolutely insane. Would I be surprised if the Kings finally got a win against Edmonton? Not necessarily. It is difficult to win year after year after year. With the Oilers, if you're old enough to remember, there was a point where Dallas looked like they owned Edmonton in the playoffs. And then one year Edmonton knocked them out, even though Dallas was the much higher seed. So it can happen where you see those teams against each other year after year, and eventually the one team that's been getting beat up ends up being the one that beats the other one up. So we'll see. Then we've got the number 1 seed Winnipeg Jets. Again, this is because they've played fewer games, right? But they would be against, just like Vancouver's the number 1 seed in the West. They've played more games than other teams as well. But Winnipeg would play the number 1 wild card Nashville Predators. Nobody wants to play Nashville, right? And then you have Colorado, the number 2 seed, against number 3 seed Dallas. So let's revisit the whole if a team could challenge who they wanted in the first round. Who would Boston want in the first round right now? And I'm assuming that in this scenario, you could pick one of the 2 wild cards. You can't pick somebody from the other division, right? So would they want Detroit or would they want Tampa? Well, I've talked about how Tampa's given them problems in the past. I think they'd pick Detroit. Those are the matchups we have anyways. Out west, good luck, Vancouver. Are you going to pick the Vegas Golden Knights, the defending Stanley Cup champions, or the Nashville Predators, who have a 15-game point streak going on at the time I'm recording this? Not an easy pick. So I think in that situation, you're better off just to pick the team you would have played anyways and decide, yep, we'll pick our poison and that's it. And then you leave the Jets trying to knock out the Preds. The Preds beat the Jets last week. So, we'll see how it all shakes down. But I do expect this year's playoffs to be kind of chaos because while Philadelphia and Detroit can be seen as kind of being on the weaker side of things in the East, and I understand that, out west, I don't know if there's a team that you can point to and say, that team clearly, they're going to be gone in the first round. In the East, you can make that argument, but keep in mind that both Detroit and Philadelphia could find themselves on the outside looking in. And if the Caps replace the Philadelphia Flyers, or the Islanders replace the Philadelphia Flyers, or the Caps and the Islanders replace both teams, that might tighten things up. Just because the Caps and the Islanders both play a style of hockey that should be conducive to a good run in the playoffs. Notice I'm not saying a long run in the playoffs, just a nice little, like maybe an upset in the first round. Then you lose in the second round because you've got something to build on for the following season, that kind of thing. But it is going to be interesting this year because I do expect these conversations to come up again. I do think we're going to see upsets in the first round, and I do expect there to be some discussion about, shouldn't we give more of an advantage for the top seeds? And my answer to that is no. If they're truly a best team in the league, they're going to have to win those games either at home or on the road. And historically, it's been just as tough to win at home as on the road in the playoffs. if a team is struggling. So, in fact, if anything, getting away from home can sometimes be the solution. I know it works during the regular season. Postseason is a little different because you're in a best of 7 series. But we've seen that where a team will have a really tough homestand, go out on the road and get their game back together, and all of a sudden they're fine. And of course, vice versa exists. But for this video and for this video's purpose, looking at teams' records at home, when teams lose, generally they lose whether they're on the road or at home. It doesn't matter. And I do think if Game 7 last year between Boston and Florida was in Florida, we might have had a different result. I believe that. I think the pressure in a Game 7 is on the home team. And I don't think there's much of an argument with that. Like, you're getting all that pressure on you. The road team, they're just happy to be there. Last year, Florida against Boston, they were number 8 seed. Nobody expected anything out of them. There was no pressure on them in a Game 7, especially since they had come back from 3 games to 1 down. So that pressure shifted as soon as that Game 5 overtime goal was scored, and Boston wasn't able to turn it around after that. And I don't think it would have mattered where they were playing. Maybe in Florida if it was Game 7, but notice that goes against the idea of the top seed getting all the home games, because it can backfire. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so thus far. I just thought this was a fun thing to look at today. But hey, thank you guys so much for your time. I will talk to you again soon.